Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're diving into this case. It's really gripped the UK, the story of Lucy Letby. And it's sparked debate even among, medical professionals, which is really saying something. You've given us quite the stack of articles and reports, and you're really trying to get us to understand not just like what happened, but all the stuff surrounding how she was convicted and the whole system around it.
Yeah.
So, expert speaker, are you up for going beyond the headlines with us?
Absolutely. Letby's case is definitely not simple. We've got medical evidence to untangle, the role of statistics, and even the, inner workings of a hospital to think about.
It's true. This one is a real-life medical mystery.
Yeah.
So just to, get us all on the same page, Letby was a nurse, worked in a neonatal unit, found guilty of killing 7 infants, attempted murder of another 6. She got a whole life order, which means no parole.
Right.
But, and this is a big but, there were 0 eyewitnesses to her actually harming these babies. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating and honestly a bit unsettling, right?
Exactly. The prosecution really built their whole case on circumstantial evidence, weaving this narrative of guilt without anyone actually seeing Letby hurt a baby.
Okay, so let's break that down because we're talking 7 murders, 6 attempted murders, all between June 2015 and June 2016. After June 2016, no more suspicious deaths.
Yeah.
They said she used different methods, injecting air, insulin, overfeeding with milk.
Right.
But again, nobody saw her do it.
Correct.
So how did they convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And that's where it gets really interesting. To understand how they built the case, we got to rewind to 2015 when some doctors at the hospital started having, these concerns about Letby.
That's where those missed signals come into play, right? Like, were there signs, but they got overlooked?
Yeah, it's one of the most unsettling parts of all this. So 2015, some doctors noticed this, I guess you call it a pattern, that Letby was present during a lot of these infant collapses and deaths in the unit. Way more than seemed normal. And they started voicing these concerns, but the hospital administration, they pushed back.
Wait, so they're worried about these babies and they're told to, back off? What happened?
Basically, not only were their concerns dismissed, they were actually made to apologize to Letby for even bringing it up.
Wow, talk about a messed up system. That's huge. So how do we go from these early warnings that seem to have been ignored to a full-on police investigation in 2017?
It took some seriously gutsy doctors. They knew how serious this was and refused to be quiet. These weren't just guesses. They saw a pattern. And because they kept at it, the police finally got involved in 2017.
These doctors, seriously brave. Okay, so let's jump to that 2017 investigation. The prosecution, they use things like blood tests that look like insulin poisoning, the fact that statistically she was around for way too many of these deaths, and what some might call strange behavior after some of these babies died.
Right. The prosecution really honed in on all that, like her texts, for instance. There were times where it seemed like she was giving like a play-by-play of what was happening at the hospital, and they said she had this intrusive curiosity, that's the term they used, about the babies who died. They even showed her Facebook searches, where she was looking up families of the infants.
Right. And then there was that chart, remember,
Yeah.
that they showed connecting Letby's shifts with all these awful incidents. It was pretty powerful evidence, at least visually.
Yeah, that chart has caused a lot of debate. They used it to try and show how often she was working when these tragedies happened. But people have criticized it a lot, said it was misleading and didn't give the whole picture.
And we want to make sure we show both sides here. It's super important to remember that Letby has always said she's innocent. Her defense? They said the deaths were because of other stuff going on in the hospital itself.
Yeah, their whole thing was casting doubt on the idea that she was the only one responsible.
Yeah.
They talked about hospital hygiene, like maybe the neonatal unit wasn't as clean as it should have been, and understaffing, like maybe the hospital was stretched too thin, putting more pressure on everyone. Basically, they were saying these factors, not Letby, caused the deaths.
I mean, here's another layer. They didn't bring in any medical experts to back up their side.
Yeah.
So now we're left wondering, did that decision help or hurt her case? Tough to say, but what we can talk about are all the doubts and controversies that came up after she was found guilty. It's like the trial just, created more questions than it answered,
Yeah.
And when you've got all these experts, medical, statistical, legal, saying they have doubts about a case this serious, well, you got to pay attention.
Absolutely. Because it goes beyond just one nurse, one hospital, right? It's about the whole justice system, making sure it works for the victims and for the accused. And part of that means really looking at how things were done, what evidence was used, even after there's a verdict. Like, take the air embolism theory.
Okay.
That was a big part of the prosecution's case. They said Letby injected air into the baby's blood, caused their deaths. But now you've got medical experts saying, hold on, that doesn't really add up. They're calling it fantastical, implausible. Pretty strong words.
So wait, they're saying it's impossible to kill someone that way. That's a bold statement.
It's not impossible, but it's very, very unlikely given the specifics here. And the biggest thing is, there's zero physical proof that this is what happened. No needle marks. Nobody saw her injecting anything as you'd expect, but that's how the babies died.
Right, that makes sense.
And it's not just the air thing. Remember those blood tests, the ones that supposedly showed insulin poisoning? Experts are looking at those again, too, and they're questioning if those tests are even accurate, especially for babies.
So the tests might not be as reliable as they seemed in court. Can you explain that? Why would it be different for infants?
Sure. Babies, especially preemies, their bodies work really differently from adults. Their metabolism, their blood volume, it's all different. They're way more sensitive to even tiny changes in their blood sugar. So a test that works for a grown-up might not tell you what's really going on with the baby.
Huh, okay.
And remember, the prosecution really leaned on proving she'd given the babies insulin. So if those test results are shaky, well, it throws a wrench in their whole argument.
Feels like the more we learn, the less solid the case against her seems. Are we saying she didn't do it then?
We gotta be careful here. It's not up to us to decide guilt or innocence, right?
Right, of course.
The courts have their rules, their standards. But when you have this much doubt about the medical stuff, and when you add in how much the statistical evidence is being criticized, yeah, it throws a big shadow of doubt over the whole thing.
And a lot of that criticism goes back to that chart, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The one they kept showing with Letby working all those times when the babies died or had emergencies.
Exactly. Experts are saying that chart was misleading, a classic example of something called the prosecutor's fallacy.
Okay, I think I've heard of that, but remind me, what's the fallacy?
It's this mistake people make in thinking, where they mix up correlation and causation. See, the prosecution, they showed that chart like it proved everything. Look, she was there for all these deaths, must be guilty. But that ignores anything else that could have been going on.
Right, like just because I drink water and I'm going to die someday doesn't mean water will kill me.
Exactly. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And get this, the chart they showed, turns out it wasn't even complete. They highlighted when Letby was working, but left out times similar things happened when she wasn't on duty.
Oh, wow. Talk about stacking the deck.
Right. It made her look way more suspicious than she maybe really was. Makes you wonder, how much can you really trust statistics in a case like this? I mean, is it enough to just show things line up, or do you need real proof, especially when it's about murder?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. People are still arguing about that, legal experts, ethicists, everyone. On the one hand, statistics can be useful, right? They show you patterns, things you might not notice otherwise. But this case shows how they can be twisted, misinterpreted.
Or just plain incomplete, like that chart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the defense, they chose not to bring in their own medical experts.
Yeah.
So the jury, they only heard one side of the medical story, which in a case this complicated probably had an impact. If all you hear is one side, and that side sounds convincing, even if it's wrong, it's easy to see how they reached a guilty verdict.
That's kind of scary when you think about it. So knowing what we know now, with all this doubt, where do things go from here?
Well, it's not over yet. The Thirlwall inquiry, it's a public inquiry. They're looking into everything, the deaths, how the hospital handled it, all of it. That's still going on.
So it's bigger than just Letby now. It's about the whole system.
Exactly.
Sounds like they're really digging deep, huh? What are they actually asking? What's the goal?
Well, they're looking at everything. What people did, sure, but also the hospital itself. Like, what was the culture there? Did the leadership, did their policies, did any of that play a role? Were they even equipped to handle something like this?
Yeah.
You know, were there ways to report concerns without, like, being afraid to speak up? Did they shut down people who tried?
It makes you think any hospital, really anywhere, should be asking those same things.
Totally.
It's not just about blaming someone. It's about, like, actually learning so this doesn't happen again.
Right, exactly. What they find out could change things big time. Not just in the UK, I bet other countries will be watching this closely. It's about figuring out where the system is weak and fixing it.
And for you listening, I bet this brings up even more questions, right? Like, if Letby really is innocent, what does that say about the whole justice system?
Yeah.
How do we get justice without putting innocent people away? especially in a case like this where so much is based on stuff that's not like, a smoking gun, expert testimony, but then the experts disagree. It's a lot.
It really is. And that's why this case is so interesting, so disturbing even. It's not just about who did it. It makes you question everything. The systems we rely on, how we decide what's true, even how we judge each other, not just in court, but out in the world.
We've covered a lot, from the crimes to the hospital to the whole system. As you keep learning about this, think about this. How much should we trust what experts say, especially when they don't agree? How do we make sense of it all when the story keeps changing?
And maybe the biggest question of all, how do we make sure the right thing happens, not just legally, but in the way we talk about this, the way we treat people involved? It's easy to get caught up in a story, but everyone deserves fairness.
This deep dive started with your questions, and it ends with even more. Don't stop digging. Keep asking those questions as you learn about this case. Thank you for joining us as we try to get to the bottom of the Lucy Letby case. We hope this deep dive helped you understand the facts, the arguments, and why this whole thing is so important.